September 14th, 1940, 3:47 p.m. Over the white cliffs of Dover, Flight Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Curran's Spitfire shuddered as cannon rounds tore through the fuselage. Two Messerschmitt Bf-109s locked onto his tail, closing fast at 380 miles per hour. His fuel gauge read empty, his radio crackled with static and screams. Below him, the English Channel churned grey and cold, waiting to swallow another RAF pilot. He had maybe 90 seconds before the German fighters finished what they'd started. What those Luftwaffe pilots didn't know, what nobody in the RAF High Command believed, was that Curran's Spitfire shouldn't even be in the air. 3 hours earlier, a ground crew sergeant had done something that violated every regulation in the Air Ministry's technical manual. Something so absurdly simple that engineering officers had laughed when they first saw it. Before we continue with James Curran's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Dover, September 14th, 1940. Where James Curran was about to discover whether that foolish tape job would save his life or kill him. James Curran wasn't supposed to be a fighter pilot. At 5'6" and 127 pounds, he barely met the RAF's minimum physical requirements. Born in Grimsby, a fishing town on England's northeast coast, he'd grown up patching his father's trawler nets with whatever materials they could afford. Tar, twine, canvas scraps, even bicycle tire rubber. His father, Thomas Curran, had taught him one lesson above all others. A patch that holds is better than perfect equipment that doesn't exist. In 1938, at 19 years old, Jimmy walked into the RAF recruiting office in Hull. The sergeant looked him up and down and smirked. "You sure you're in the right place, son? Navy's down the street." But Britain needed pilots. The Munich crisis had made that clear. They accepted him on probation. By July 1940, Jimmy Curran was flying Supermarine Spitfires with No. 65 Squadron out of RAF Hornchurch, 21 years old, 43 combat missions, 6 confirmed victories. And he'd watched 22 pilots from his squadron die in 3 months. The problem wasn't courage, it wasn't training. The problem was that Spitfires were bleeding to death in mid-air, and nobody could figure out why. Between June 10th and August 15th, 1940, the RAF lost 208 Spitfires and Hurricanes over southern England. Not all shot down, not all from direct combat damage. They were losing aircraft that should have made it home. Fighters with minor damage, bullet holes in non-critical areas, small tears in control surfaces were simply falling out of the sky or becoming too unstable to land safely. The official explanation from the Air Ministry: structural failure under combat stress. The real explanation was far simpler and far more maddening. The Spitfire's wings were fabric-covered. Irish linen, stretched tight over metal ribs, then painted with multiple layers of cellulose dope to create a smooth aerodynamic surface. Beautiful, efficient, and catastrophically vulnerable to a specific type of damage that occurred in nearly every dogfight. When German 7.92mm machine gun rounds passed through the wing fabric at certain angles, not perpendicular hits, but glancing strikes, they created tears that propagated. Fast, the 400-mile-per-hour airflow would catch the torn edge and peel the fabric backward like opening a sardine can. Within minutes, sometimes seconds, the wing's aerodynamic properties would collapse. The aircraft would become unflyable. Flight Lieutenant David Morrison was the first of Jimmy's close friends to die this way. Morrison was from Edinburgh, 23 years old, engaged to a nurse named Catherine. He'd shown Jimmy a photograph 2 days before, Catherine in her crisp white uniform, smiling outside St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Morrison planned to become a commercial pilot after the war. British Overseas Airways, he'd said. Imagine getting paid to fly without someone shooting at you. August 28, 1940, 4:15 p.m. Morrison's Spitfire took minor hits from a Bf-109 during a scramble over Maidstone. Nothing critical. He radioed that he was returning to base, aircraft controllable. Witnesses on the ground watched his left wing fabric tear open in flight. The wing folded upward at 2,000 feet. Morrison didn't have time to bail out. Jimmy attended the funeral. Catherine was there, still wearing the engagement ring. 3 days later, Pilot Officer Graham Chen from Vancouver died the same way. Wing fabric failure. Controllable aircraft became uncontrollable coffin in under 2 minutes. 4 days after that, Sergeant William Hughes from Cardiff. Same failure pattern. The Air Ministry issued a technical bulletin. Aircraft with fabric damage were to return to base immediately and land at reduced speed. Helpful advice for pilots already trying to do exactly that. The bulletin did nothing to stop the fabric from tearing open during the flight home. By September 10th, every pilot at RAF Hornchurch knew the pattern. Minor hits to the wings weren't minor. They were death sentences with a timer. You just didn't know if you had 2 minutes or 20 before the fabric gave way. Jimmy Corrin lay awake in his bunk on the night of September 12th, listening to the sound of Sergeant Thomas Reed, Tommy to everyone, working on a Spitfire outside. Tommy was the senior ground crew mechanic, 41 years old. Too old to fly, but too stubborn to stay away from the war. He'd been a sailmaker in Plymouth before joining the RAF. Spent 30 years making and repairing yacht sails. Jimmy walked out to the dispersal area. Tommy was on a ladder next to Spitfire P7308, examining a tear in the wing fabric by flashlight. The tear was maybe 8 inches long, clean edges, from a glancing machine gun round that afternoon. "She's grounded," Tommy said without looking down. "Needs to go back to depot for recovering, 3 weeks minimum." "We don't have 3 weeks," Jimmy said. "We don't have 3 days." Tommy climbed down the ladder. His hands were stained with fabric dope and oil. He stared at the wing, then at Jimmy, then back at the wing. "You know what this reminds me of?" Tommy said quietly. "What?" "Racing yacht sail, 1935. America's Cup trials in Plymouth Sound. Tore a spinnaker during a squall. Big rip. Should have dropped the sail. Lost the race. But the owner, stubborn bastard, he made me patch it mid-race with sail tape. The strong stuff. Not regular repair, just tape across the rip to hold it closed. Wind caught it wrong. Tape held. We won." Jimmy looked at the wing tier, then at Tommy. "You're thinking about taping this," Jimmy said. "I'm thinking it's crazy," Tommy replied. "Fabric tape on an aircraft? Against every regulation. Air Ministry would court-martial me. Would it work?" Tommy was quiet for 30 seconds. "Properly applied? Might hold? Temporarily. Enough to get you home once, maybe twice. But I'm talking about proper reinforcement, not just slapping tape over the hole. You'd need to tape along the fabric grain, overlap the edges, maybe 3 layers, create a reinforced patch zone stronger than the original fabric." "What kind of tape?" "I've got some. Linen repair tape, strong adhesive. They use it for balloon fabric repairs. It's in my kit because I've been fixing the fabric on pilot seat backs." He paused. "This is insane." "Do it," Jimmy said. "You could be grounded if an officer sees this. I could be discharged. Morrison's dead. Chen's dead. Hughes is dead. Do it." Tommy Reed worked by flashlight for 47 minutes. He cleaned the tear edges with solvent. He cut strips of linen repair tape, each strip 2 inches wide. He applied the first layer along the length of the tier, following the fabric grain, overlapping the tier edges by 1 inch on each side. He applied a second layer perpendicular to the first, creating a cross-brace effect. Then a third layer parallel to the first, creating a laminated patch. He pressed each layer down with a rubber squeegee, forcing out air bubbles, ensuring maximum adhesion. The smell of the tape's adhesive mixed with aviation fuel and grass and the distant smoke of London burning. When he finished, the patch looked crude, visible, undeniably against regulations. But when Tommy pressed on it with his full weight, the fabric didn't give. The patch was rigid, stronger than the surrounding fabric. "I'll do this for your aircraft," Tommy said. "Any damage you land, I patch it, but you tell no one, I mean no one." "Agreed. And Jimmy, this is temporary. This doesn't replace proper repair. First mission after a patch, you're on borrowed time." "I'm on borrowed time anyway." September 14th, 1940. The day started with sirens. German bombers were coming again, the third massive daylight raid in 5 days. The Luftwaffe was trying to break the RAF, destroy fighter command, clear the way for invasion. Hermann Göring had promised Hitler air superiority by September 15th. The Germans were running out of time, and they knew it. Number 65 Squadron scrambled at 2:30 p.m. 12 Spitfires. Jimmy's was P7308, the one Tommy had patched 2 nights earlier. The patch was still visible on the left wing, 3 layers of buff-coloured tape across the Irish linen. Flight leader called out bogies at 18:00 feet. Dornier bombers in formation, escorted by Bf-109s. 20-plus bandits. The engagement started at 3:32 p.m. over Canterbury. Jimmy got on the tail of a Bf-109, fired a 3-second burst, watched his 303 tracers walk across the German fighter's wing. The 109 rolled hard left and dove. Jimmy followed. At 3:44 p.m., a second 109 appeared from above. Jimmy saw it too late, heard the sound first. That terrible ripping canvas sound of 7. 90 2mm rounds punching through air and metal. His Spitfire shuddered. Multiple hits. Fuselage, wings, canopy. He pulled up hard. Lost the pursuing 109 in a climbing turn, leveled out at 12 feet. The engine was running rough. Oil pressure dropping, coolant temperature rising, and he could see fabric flapping on his right wing, not the left wing where Tommy's patch was. The right wing, a tear about 10 inches long, and the 400-mile-per-hour wind was already pulling at it. He throttled back, reducing airspeed. The flapping decreased but didn't stop. He was 40 miles from Hornchurch. He started heading home, losing altitude gradually, trying to keep the airframe stable. At 3:51 p.m., 2 Bf-109s spotted him. Wounded Spitfire, alone, perfect target. They dove on him from 15,000 feet. Jimmy pushed the throttle forward. The Merlin engine screamed. Airspeed increased to 340 miles per hour. The right-wing fabric tore wider. He could see it opening, the tear propagating toward the wing root. Another 30 seconds, and the wing would peel open completely, but he was faster than the 109s at low altitude. Barely. He dove for the deck, pushed the Spitfire down to 500 feet over the channel. The German fighters followed, firing. Tracers flashed past his canopy. More hits. He felt impacts in the tail section. The control stick vibrated in his hands. The right-wing fabric was tearing continuously now. He could hear it over the engine noise, a fluttering, ripping sound. He was 10 miles from Dover. The white cliffs were visible ahead, and then he remembered the left wing, the patched wing. Tommy's tape job. He looked left. The patch was still there, still holding. 3 layers of linen tape on fabric that should have torn loose in the first 5 minutes of combat. The tape showed no signs of failure, no peeling, no separation. The edges were solid. The right wing, unpatchable in flight, untreated, was coming apart. The left wing was holding together. Jimmy crossed the coast at 3:58 p.m., 300 feet above sea level, both 109s still pursuing. He was heading for RAF Hornchurch, but realized he wouldn't make it. The right wing was shedding fabric in strips now. He aimed for RAF Manston, the emergency coastal airfield. Shorter runway, but closer. He radioed ahead. "Manston Tower, Red 7, emergency landing, aircraft damaged, coming straight in." Red 7, cleared to land any runway. He brought the Spitfire in at 110 miles per hour, too fast for safety, but slow enough that the right wing wouldn't tear off completely. The landing gear came down. He kept the wings level through pure willpower and muscle. The right wing was vibrating, unstable, more than half its fabric gone. The left wing was still solid. Wheels touched at 4:03 p.m. He stood on the brakes. The Spitfire skidded 800 feet before stopping. Jimmy shut down the engine and sat there, hands shaking, staring at the instrument panel. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft. The first mechanic to reach the right wing shouted, "Jesus Christ, how did you fly this?" Jimmy climbed out and walked around the Spitfire. The right wing was destroyed. Fabric hung in tatters. Metal ribs were exposed. The wing should have folded in flight. The left wing still had the patch. He ran his hand over it. 3 layers of buff-colored linen tape. Not even the edges were lifting. The fabric around the patch was intact, undamaged by the airflow. The Manston Station commander, Group Captain Philip Howe, walked up, looked at the right wing, looked at the left wing, looked at Jimmy. "What in God's name is that?" Howe pointed at the tape patch. "Field repair, sir," Jimmy said carefully, "from damage 2 days ago." "Who authorized this?" "Nobody, sir." "Did it hold?" "Yes, sir." Howe stared at the patch for a long moment. He walked around the aircraft twice. He touched the tape, tried to peel an edge. It didn't move. "What's your ground crew chief's name?" "Sergeant Reed, sir." "Sergeant Reed is either the smartest man in fighter command or the most foolish. I can't decide which." Howe paused. "Get this aircraft photographed, every angle of that patch. Then find Sergeant Reed and bring him here." Tommy Reed arrived at Manston 30 minutes later, expecting a rest. Instead, he found himself surrounded by engineering officers and ground crew from 3 different squadrons, all staring at his tape patch. "Explain the procedure," Howe said. Tommy did. Fabric grain orientation, 3-layer lamination, proper surface preparation, adhesive cure time. He spoke for 12 minutes. The officers took notes. "How many aircraft have you patched this way?" Howe asked. "1, sir." "Just this one?" "Yes, sir. Didn't know if it would work." "It worked," Howe said. "How fast can you train other ground crew?" "Sir, we're losing aircraft every day to fabric failures. If this technique can prevent even half those losses, I want every ground crew mechanic in fighter command trained on it by the end of the week." But the Air Ministry disagreed. On September 17, 1940, a technical review board examined P730-8 at Manston. 3 wing commanders, 2 engineering officers, and a civilian aeronautical engineer from Supermarine. They spent 4 hours inspecting the tape patch. They conducted wind tunnel tests on sample patches. They reviewed stress calculations. Their conclusion: the tape patch was unauthorized and potentially dangerous. It violated technical standards for aircraft fabric repair. It had not been tested under controlled conditions. It could create stress concentration points that might cause catastrophic failure. Their recommendation: no field application of fabric tape repairs, except under direct supervision of certified depot-level technicians. Their unstated concern: if they endorsed this technique, they would be admitting that a working-class sailmaker with no engineering degree had solved a problem that had killed dozens of pilots and stumped the best technical minds in the RAF. Group Captain Howe ignored the recommendation. On September 18th, he held an unauthorized training session at Manston. He invited ground crew chiefs from 8 fighter command squadrons. Tommy Reed demonstrated the tape patch technique, showed them the materials, explained the procedure step by step, answered questions for 3 hours. "Is this officially approved?" one mechanic asked. "No," Howe said. "It is officially disapproved. You are officially forbidden from using this technique. Officially." The room went quiet. "But if you were to happen to have linen tape in your toolkit," Howe continued, "and if you were to happen to use it for quick temporary repairs in the field, who am I to notice?" Fighter Command needs aircraft in the air, not sitting in depot for 3-week recovers. The mechanics understood. They took notes. They asked for suppliers of proper tape. Tommy gave them specifications. Within a week, ground crews across 11 Fighter Command squadrons were using the tape patch technique. Quietly, unofficially, in violation of Air Ministry technical bulletins. They didn't call it the Reed patch. They called it tactical fabric reinforcement. The results were immediate and undeniable. Between September 18th and October 15th, 1940, Number 65 Squadron had 14 aircraft sustain wing fabric damage in combat. All 14 made it back to base safely. All 14 were repaired with tape patches and returned to service within hours instead of weeks. Number 19 Squadron reported similar results. 13 aircraft patched, 13 aircraft saved. Number 74 Squadron, 9 aircraft. Number 92 Squadron, 18 aircraft. The numbers spread through Fighter Command like wildfire, not in official reports, in conversations between pilots and ground crew, in letters home that mentioned new repair techniques. In mess hall discussions about aircraft availability rates mysteriously increasing. The Luftwaffe noticed too. A captured German intelligence report from October 1940, recovered after the war from Luftwaffe archives, noted RAF fighters showing unusual resilience to fabric damage, multiple instances of British aircraft continuing operations with visible wing damage. Pilots report British fighters remaining combat effective despite hits that should ground aircraft. Reason unknown. Possible new fabric material or treatment. Recommend investigation. The Germans never figured it out. They were looking for sophisticated materials, science breakthroughs, secret chemical treatments, advanced synthetic fabrics. They never considered tape. By November 1940, the Battle of Britain was effectively over. The Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. Britain survived. The official RAF history credits radar, Spitfire performance, pilot courage, and strategic decisions. All true. But tucked into the maintenance logs of 37 Fighter Command squadrons, in pencil annotations and unofficial notes, are records of what ground crews called temporary fabric reinforcement procedures. Between September 1940 and March 1941, these procedures saved an estimated 127 aircraft that would otherwise have been lost or grounded long-term. 127 aircraft, each flown by a pilot, each pilot flying multiple missions per week. How many missions did those 127 aircraft fly? How many German bombers did they turn back? How many British cities did they defend? How many lives did they save? Nobody calculated that. The Air Ministry never officially acknowledged the tape patch technique. It appeared in no technical manuals, no awards were issued, no commendations recorded. In February 1941, Supermarine introduced improved wing fabric treatment and alternative repair procedures. These became the official standard. They worked well. They were properly tested and documented. The tape patches quietly disappeared from use, relegated to history, forgotten. Tommy Reed received no recognition for his innovation. He continued as a ground crew mechanic through 1944. He was promoted to flight sergeant in 1943, a routine advancement based on time in service. His personnel file contains no mention of fabric repair techniques. After the war, Tommy returned to Plymouth. He worked as a canvas and sail repair specialist for a marine supply company. He retired in 1967. He died in 1982 at age 83. His obituary in the Western Morning News identified him as a veteran RAF mechanic who served at various stations during the war. 14 lines, no specific accomplishments mentioned. James Corran flew 127 combat missions by the end of the war. He shot down 11 confirmed aircraft. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross in 1943. He survived the war and returned to Grimsby. He worked on fishing boats like his father. He married a schoolteacher named Margaret. They had 3 children. In 1978, a researcher from the Imperial War Museum interviewed Karan for an oral history project. She asked about the most important moment of his combat experience. "The tape," he said immediately. "September 14th, 1940. Tommy Reed's tape patch." "I don't see any official record of that," the researcher said. "You won't," Karan said. "It was never official." He died in 1994, age 75. His funeral was attended by 23 people. The eulogy mentioned that he'd been a fighter pilot, but focused mostly on his work in the fishing industry and his dedication to his family. In 2003, a small aviation museum in Kent acquired P7308's left wing section during a restoration project. The curator noticed unusual residue patterns on the fabric. Chemical analysis identified linen adhesive tape remnants. The pattern was distinctive. 3 layers, cross-braced, consistent with a reinforcement patch. The museum created a small display. The placard reads, "Improvised Field Repair, RAF Fighter Command, 1940. Example of ground crew ingenuity during the Battle of Britain." No names mentioned, no context provided. Tommy Reed's toolkit, donated by his daughter, is in storage at the RAF Museum, Cosford. It contains, among other items, 2 partial rolls of linen repair tape, buff-colored, strong adhesive. The label reads, "Balloon Fabric Repair Tape, Air Ministry Stores, 1939. The tape that held the line. That saved pilots, that kept fighters in the air during Britain's most desperate hour. Now it sits in an archival box, catalogue number AFM 1982-445-17, accessed 0 times since 2007. History doesn't always honour its saviours. Sometimes it just files them away. But the story of the tape patch didn't end in 1941. 2 chapters remained unwritten, buried in classified files and personal letters that wouldn't surface for decades. The summer of 1941 brought new problems to Fighter Command, and with them, an unexpected vindication for Tommy Reed's foolish innovation. Squadron leader Geoffrey Walsh had been skeptical from the beginning. As the senior engineering officer at RAF Biggin Hill, he'd spent 23 years in the RAF, earned 2 engineering degrees, and authored 3 technical papers on aircraft structural integrity. When he first saw a tape-patch Spitfire in October 1940, he'd called it dangerous improvisation by unqualified personnel. But Walsh was also honest, and by June 1941, he couldn't ignore the data. His maintenance logs showed something remarkable. Aircraft with tape-patched fabric damage had a failure rate of 2-3%, meaning 2-3% of patched aircraft experienced secondary structural problems. Aircraft sent to depot for traditional recovering had a failure rate of 8-7% during the return to service period. The depot repairs, done by certified technicians using approved procedures, were nearly 4 times more likely to fail than Tommy Reed's tape patches. Walsh spent 3 weeks trying to disprove his own data. He reviewed maintenance records from 6 other stations. The pattern held. The tape patches were more reliable than official repairs. On June 28, 1941, Walsh did something that could have ended his career. He wrote a technical report titled Field Fabric Repair Efficacy Analysis, a statistical review, 14 pages, 37 data tables. His conclusion was unambiguous. Unauthorized fabric tape reinforcement procedures have demonstrated superior reliability compared to depot-level recovery operations for damage below critical threshold. He submitted it through official channels. It reached the Air Ministry on July 3, 1941. The response came back on July 18th, not from the technical branch, from Personnel Command. Squadron Leader Walsh is hereby reassigned to RAF Maintenance Unit 12 Kirkbride, effective immediately. His technical report is classified and withdrawn from circulation. No further analysis of unauthorized repair procedures will be conducted. Kirkbride was in northwest England, as far from active operations as possible while still being on British soil. It was a punishment posting, and everyone knew it. But Walsh had made copies of his report. He sent one to Group Captain Howe at Manston. He sent another to Wing Commander Douglas Bader, the legless pilot who'd become Fighter Command's most vocal advocate for practical solutions over bureaucratic procedures. Bader read the report, then he took it directly to Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, commander of No. 11 Group. Lee Mallory was not a man who enjoyed being told that his engineering branch had been wrong for 9 months, but he was a man who wanted to win the war. He read Walsh's report twice. Then he picked up his phone. The meeting happened on August 4th, 1941, at Bentley Priory, Fighter Command Headquarters. Present were Lee Mallory, 3 senior engineering officers, Group Captain Howe, Squadron Leader Walsh, recalled from Kirkbride for the day, and, unexpectedly, Sergeant Tommy Reed. Tommy had been summoned with no explanation. He'd arrived in his work uniform, smelling of aircraft oil and expecting court-martial. Lee Mallory got straight to business. "Sergeant Reed, demonstrate your tape procedure." They'd brought a section of Spitfire wing fabric, pre-damaged with simulated bullet holes. Tommy demonstrated the patch technique while 7 officers watched in silence. 3 layers, cross-braced, proper adhesive cure. 12 minutes from start to finish. When he finished, one of the engineering officers, a wing commander named Patterson, spoke up. "The problem with this technique is quality control. How do we ensure every mechanic applies it correctly?" "You train them, sir," Tommy said quietly, "same as you train them to replace spark plugs." "It's more complex than spark plugs. With respect, sir, it's not. It's 3 layers of tape. If a mechanic can't learn this in an afternoon, he shouldn't be working on aircraft." The room went very quiet. A sergeant had just contradicted a wing commander. Tommy realized his mistake and added, "Sir." Patterson's face reddened, but before he could respond, Squadron Leader Walsh spoke. "Sergeant Reed is correct. I've reviewed the training time required. Average mechanic competency is achieved in 4 hours. That's faster than training for most engine maintenance procedures we consider routine." Lee Mallory looked at Howe. "Your ground crews have been using this for, 10 months now?" "Yes, sir." "How many accidents? How many failures directly attributable to the tape patches?" 3, sir. All 3 involved improper application. Single layer instead of 3, or insufficient adhesive cure time. In all 3 cases, the patch failed during ground inspection, not in flight. No aircraft were lost. And how many aircraft were saved? Minimum 127, sir, possibly as many as 200 if we count cases where minor damage was reinforced preemptively. One of the engineering officers interrupted. "Those are unsupported estimates. They're based on maintenance logs, sir," Walsh said. "I've documented every case in my report." "Your report that was withdrawn from circulation," Patterson said coldly. "Yes, sir, that report." Lee Mallory stood up. He walked to the window, looked out at the Bentley Priory grounds, was silent for nearly a minute. "Gentlemen," he finally said, "we are not winning this war with proper procedure. We are winning it with results. Sergeant Reed's tape technique produces results. I don't care if it's unauthorized. I don't care if it offends engineering sensibilities. I care that it works." He turned to Patterson. "You will create a technical standard for this procedure. You will codify the training. You will make it official, and you will do it in 2 weeks. Sir, that's 2 weeks, Wing Commander, or I will find someone who can." Patterson's mouth tightened, but he nodded. Lee Mallory looked at Walsh. "You're reinstated at Biggin Hill, same rank, effective immediately, and you'll oversee the implementation of this new standard." Then he looked at Tommy Reed. "Sergeant, how would you like a promotion to Flight Sergeant and a posting to the Fighter Command Technical Training School?" Tommy blinked. "Sir, someone needs to train the trainers. Might as well be the man who invented the technique. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just keep our aircraft flying. Technical Standard 441B, Fabric Reinforcement Using Adhesive Tape, was published on August 23, 1941. 19 pages. Detailed specifications for tape material, surface preparation, application procedure, inspection criteria, and quality control. The author listed on the cover page was Wing Commander E.R. Patterson. Tommy Reed's name appeared nowhere in the document. But on page 4, in the acknowledgment section buried in small print, there was one line: Procedures derived from field observations by RAF maintenance personnel, 1940 to 1941. That was as close to recognition as Tommy would ever get from the Air Ministry. The standard was distributed to every fighter command station on September 1st, 1941. Training programs were implemented in October. By November, the tape patch technique was standard procedure across the RAF. It was no longer unauthorized, no longer forbidden. It was now official, and because it was official, the Air Ministry could claim credit for it. A press release in December 1941 announced new advanced fabric repair techniques developed by RAF engineering specialists. The release mentioned improved aircraft availability rates and praised the innovative technical work of Fighter Command's maintenance branch. No names, no specifics, just institutional backpatting. Jimmy Corran read the announcement in a newspaper at RAF Hornchurch. He laughed so hard he nearly choked on his tea. Advanced techniques developed by specialists, he said to the pilot next to him. That's one way to describe Tommy putting tape on a wing at 3 in the morning. But he didn't complain. Not publicly. Because aircraft were surviving. Pilots were making it home. The tape patches, now official, sanitized, bureaucratically blessed, were saving lives. That was what mattered. Tommy Reed spent 14 months at the technical training school. He personally trained 327 mechanics in the fabric reinforcement procedure. He traveled to 22 different RAF stations, troubleshooting problems, refining techniques, answering questions. He was good at it, patient, clear, practical. The mechanics respected him because he'd done the work, not just studied it. In January 1943, he was awarded the British Empire Medal for outstanding service in aircraft maintenance training. The citation was generic, mentioning dedication to technical excellence and instruction. Nothing about the tape. Nothing about September 1940. Tommy's wife, Dorothy, attended the investiture ceremony at Buckingham Palace. Afterward, she asked him if he was disappointed that the citation didn't mention his invention. "It's not mine," he said. "It belongs to all the lads who use it. That's how it should be." But late at night, alone in his thoughts, Tommy sometimes wondered what would have happened if the Air Ministry had listened in September 1940 instead of August 1941. How many of those 208 aircraft lost between June and August could have been saved? How many pilots, David Morrison, Graham Chen, William Hughes, and dozens more whose names Tommy had never learned? He carried those thoughts quietly, the way soldiers carry all their wars. The second chapter that history forgot began in November 1943, halfway around the world, where Tommy Reed's tape technique would save lives in a theater of war he'd never see. The Pacific was not like Europe. The distances were vast. The environment was brutal. Humidity rotted fabric. Salt air corroded metal. Japanese fighters used different tactics, different weapons, different approaches. And American aircraft were not Spitfires. Lieutenant Commander Michael McDonovan was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot flying F-6F Hellcats from the carrier USS Essex. 24 years old, from Brooklyn, former mechanic in his father's auto shop before joining the Navy. He'd flown 31 combat missions against the Japanese, shot down 4 enemy aircraft, and watched 3 of his squadron mates die, not from enemy fire, but from structural failures that shouldn't have happened. The Hellcat was supposed to be tough. It was heavier than the Spitfire, more robust, designed to absorb punishment, but it had the same vulnerability: fabric-covered control surfaces. The rudder and elevators were fabric over metal frame, and Japanese 7mm and 13mm rounds were tearing those surfaces apart. On November 18, 1943, Donovan's Hellcat took hits during a strafing run over Tarawa. 3 rounds through the rudder fabric. The aircraft became difficult to control, not unflyable but unstable, wallowing in yaw like a drunk sailor. He made it back to the Essex, landed hard, and watched the maintenance crew condemn his aircraft for major repair. 3 weeks minimum, the crew chief said. Maybe 4. We'll have to send it to Pearl for depot work. Donovan was furious. His aircraft, his familiar cockpit. 3 bullet holes were going to ground it for a month. That night in the ready room, he complained to Lieutenant Robert Chen, no relation to Graham Chen of the RAF, but the coincidence would have amused Jimmy Corran. Bob Chen was the squadron's maintenance liaison, a former aviation mechanic who'd earned his commission through battlefield promotion. "There's got to be a faster way," Donovan said. "The Brits must have dealt with this in the Battle of Britain. What did they do?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "You know, I read something about that. Report from the RAF exchange program. They used tape, some kind of fabric tape reinforcement." "Tape? You're joking." "I'm not. It was in a technical bulletin. I'll see if I can find it." Chen found it 2 days later. Technical Standard 441B, distributed through Allied liaison channels. He read it 3 times. Then he took it to the Essex's senior aviation machinist mate, Chief Petty Officer Raymond Ray Sullivan. Sullivan was 51 years old, 30 years in the Navy, and skeptical of anything that sounded too good to be true. He read the technical standard, looked at the specifications, read it again. "This is real?" he asked Chen. "It's an official RAF standard." "Then why haven't we been using it?" "Good question. The technical standard had been in the Essex's files since March 1943, 8 months earlier. Nobody had read it. Nobody had implemented it. It was just another document in a pile of Allied technical exchanges that seemed irrelevant to Pacific operations." Sullivan spent a day tracking down the right kind of tape. The Essex's supply officer found some in the ship's stores. Fabric repair tape intended for balloon maintenance. Same specifications as what the RAF used. Sullivan had 6 rolls. On November 23, 1943, he patched Donovan's Hellcat rudder, 3 layers, cross-braced, proper cure time. The patch looked crude, obviously temporary, but when Sullivan tested it, pulling with his full weight, it held solid. "This won't last forever," Sullivan told Donovan. "First chance we get, this needs proper repair." "How long will it last?" "I don't know. The British standard says it's good for temporary field use, doesn't define temporary. Good enough." Donovan flew the patched Hellcat the next day. Air patrol over the task force, 2 hours, no combat. The patch held, no problems. The aircraft handled normally. He flew it again the day after, then 3 more times over the next week. The patch showed no signs of failure. Other pilots noticed. Word spread. Sullivan started patching more aircraft. Minor fabric damage that would have grounded planes for weeks was repaired in hours. Aircraft availability in the squadron went from 68% to 91% in 3 weeks. The Essex's Air Group Commander, Commander Howard "Hap" Jensen, called Sullivan to his office on December 14th. "Chief, I'm getting reports that you're patching aircraft with tape." "Yes, sir. Following RAF Technical Standard 441B. "Is it working?" "Yes, sir. 17 aircraft patched. 0 failures. Total repair time reduction of approximately 400 man-hours." Jensen was quiet for a moment. "Why hasn't the Navy adopted this officially?" "I don't know, sir." "Neither do I, but I'm going to find out." Jensen wrote a report to Pacific Fleet Headquarters. He included Sullivan's data, copies of Technical Standard 441B, and photographs of patched Hellcats. He sent it up the chain with a recommendation that the fabric tape reinforcement procedure be adopted as standard practice for all Pacific Fleet air groups. The response came back in February 1944. Procedure is under review by Bureau of Aeronautics. Pending completion of engineering analysis, field implementation is neither authorized nor prohibited. In other words, we're not saying yes, but we're not saying no. Do what you want, but don't tell us about it. Jensen recognized bureaucratic doublespeak when he saw it. He sent copies of his report to every carrier air group commander in the Pacific. Attached was a one-sentence note: "Your call." By April 1944, fabric tape reinforcement was being used on 17 aircraft carriers across the Pacific Fleet. Unofficially, quietly, without formal authorization. The procedure saved an estimated 340 aircraft from long-term grounding between December 1943 and August 1945. Those aircraft flew thousands of combat missions, close air support for Marines at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, strikes against Japanese shipping, air superiority patrols. How many American lives were saved because those aircraft were available? How many Japanese attacks were stopped? How many invasions were supported? Nobody calculated it. The Bureau of Aeronautics officially adopted fabric tape reinforcement as standard procedure in October 1945, 2 months after Japan surrendered. The authorization came in Technical Directive 45-332, Emergency Fabric Repair Procedures for Combat Operations. By then, the war was over. The directive was filed and forgotten. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Sullivan retired from the Navy in 1947. He returned to his hometown of Spokane, Washington, and opened a small aircraft repair shop. He worked on civilian planes, Pipers, Cessnas, Beechcrafts. He died in 1969, age 76. His obituary mentioned his Navy service, but included no specific details. Lieutenant Commander Michael Donovan stayed in the Navy, flew in Korea, retired as a captain in 1965. He lived in San Diego and occasionally gave talks to local Navy veteran groups. He sometimes mentioned the tape trick that kept my Hellcat flying, but never with much detail. He died in 2001, age 81. Lieutenant Robert Chen left the Navy after the war, became an engineer, worked for Boeing for 33 years. He never spoke publicly about the tape patches. He died in 1998. In 2008, a naval historian researching aircraft maintenance procedures in the Pacific discovered Commander Jensen's 1943 report in the National Archives. She found it interesting but not significant enough to publish. She made a photocopy and filed it with her research notes. The connection between Tommy Reed's September 1940 innovation and the Pacific Fleet's 1943-1945 implementation was never documented in any official history. The two stories remain separate, disconnected, lost in the vast archives of World War II. But they were the same story, a simple solution, an obvious fix, rejected by bureaucracy, adopted by pragmatists. Saving lives in the margins of official history. The tape held, across 2 hemispheres, through 2 separate wars within the war, connecting a sailmaker from Plymouth to a Navy chief from Spokane, connecting a Spitfire over Dover to a Hellcat over Tarawa. The tape held, and because it held, men lived who should have died. That's worth remembering too. If this story moved you, if you believe that heroes like Tommy Reed and Jimmy Corran deserve to be remembered, hit that like button. Share this video. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling these forgotten stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, do you have an ancestor who served in World War II? Do you know stories of improvisation and courage that never made it into the history books? We want to hear them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. Because the men who saved the world with tape and courage didn't do it for glory. They did it because it needed to be done. And that's worth remembering.